To know more such amazing stories from Indian history, click the bell icon and subscribe to Live History India.
Hello and welcome to our book club. I'm Minnie Mellon. Today we go beyond the realm of history per se to talk about the evolution of a faith, the evolution of ideas through the lives of the great Sikh gurus. I'm talking about the story of the Sikhs, a book by Sarbpreet Singh, who joins us from Boston. Sarbpreet Singh, thank you so much for joining us today. As I said, it goes beyond the realm of history. Though you have leaned on history and some rigorous research on that, but you've also taken into consideration the many fables, the ideas, the books and the poetry of the gurus to really bring this book together. So I'm going to start by asking you, what made you venture into this in this way?
Absolutely. So it's absolutely a pleasure to be here with you. The story of the Sikhs is a very personal take on Sikh history. And in a certain sense, it's reflective of my own journey as a young Sikh, far from my homeland, which started, a few decades ago after I'd left India to come to the US for graduate study. So not having ever learned how to read Gurmukhi, my initial engagement with the history of Sikhism was through works written in English. Serendipitously, I stumbled upon a history of the Sikhs written by J.D. Cunningham, who used to be in the service of the East India Company and was posted at Ludhiana. And he was very fascinated by Sikhs. And in the mid-1800s, he wrote a history of the Sikhs in English. That was followed by my engagement with Max Arthur McAuliffe, who spent a lot of time with the Sikh intellectuals of his time, most notably Khan Singh Nabha, and wrote his opus, The Sikh Religion, which is a recounting of Sikh history from a very traditional viewpoint and also engages significantly with the scriptures. So that was kind of my first engagement. I was a young man. I was in grad school. I got busy with my career, with my family. Writing is my second career, so to speak. Most of my early career was spent in technology. So long story short, I got busy with other things, and this more or less remained an interest. Now, in parallel, as I learned Sikh history myself, I started teaching young children, first in New Jersey, where I used to live, and then in Boston. And I found it to be very fulfilling and also a little challenging. When you're working with 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds, trying to keep their interest engaged in a subject like history, which can be dry, is not an easy task. So I tried all kinds of things over my years as I taught them. And, I found that relating the lives of the gurus to things that matter to them in this day and age was particularly effective. And you see a lot of that in the book as well. Now, of course, by then I had taught myself Gurmukhi, and I had started engaging with writings in Punjabi written in Gurmukhi as well, most notably the mystical writings of Bhai Veer Singh, who was a savant, a philosopher, and has really written beautifully about the Sikh faith. And then the poet Kavi Santokh Singh, who wrote in Braj Bhasha. So his opus is called Gur Pratap Suraj Granth, and it's really a magnificent work of poetry. It's history recounted in Braj poetry. Found it to be very, very fascinating. And then I stumbled upon yet another set of writings. This was also epic poetry written in Braj. This is called sort of the Gurbilas format, heroic poetry written about the 6th Guru, about the 10th Guru. And finally, Senapati's Gursoba. Senapati was one of the celebrated court poets in the court of Guru Gobind Singh. He wrote the first known biography of Guru Gobind Singh during his lifetime. It's called Sri Gur Sobha. It's also written in Braj verse. So all of these sources together sort of combined to form the basis of the story of the Sikhs. It's really reflective of my own journey and sort of the wonder that I felt when I read about the lives of the gurus. See, as a Sikh, even when my connection with the faith was very, very slim, one tended to place the gurus at a distance. They were noble beings, they were admirable, they were kind of somewhere up there. But when I read Cunningham's history in particular, I remember I was really taken by how human the stories were. Battles for succession. The son doesn't succeed to his father's throne or gaddi and gets very, very angry and, rebels. And family intrigue. The younger son is made the guru and the older son doesn't accept it. And he rebels and he starts a whole parallel line that confuses people for generations. So these were very human stories and very, very interesting to me.
Right.
So all of this essentially went into the creation of the story of the Sikhs.
Right. It's very interesting because as a lay person who is not very familiar with the book or the deeper history of Sikhism, I found it interesting because in the lives of the Sikh gurus, I also found a parallel of what was happening in India. The connection almost, Guru to Mughal emperor was also very interesting because it traces it from Babur to Aurangzeb and the battle at the end. So I'm going to ask you, from a historical point of view, since our purview is history, what did you glean from the contemporary accounts and what were the things that stood out for you, especially in the early formative period of Sikhism?
Sure. So I will take the discussion to a somewhat broader plane and talk about the worldview of Guru Nanak, which really informs every aspect of Sikhism. So Guru Nanak was definitely of this world. And what do I mean by that? Udasi, in the context of his travels, connotes a withdrawal from the world. So he withdrew from his family, he left his wife and sons, and he wandered around, which is, very much in the sort of mainstream notion of what ascetics do, in the broader Indian context. Yet, after his travels were over, Guru Nanak decided to settle down. He was a farmer. He established a town, Kartarpur, a community, and there he lived until the rest of his life, very, very connected with society. That tells us something very, very profound and important about him. Guru Nanak was, of course, a holy man. We'll talk about the other aspects of his personality, but his connection to the divine was tremendously important. Yet, his connection to the world around him was tremendously important as well. And that manifests itself in many, many different ways. As a 9-year-old boy, when he's given the Janeu and he refuses it because he sees it as a symbol of caste oppression. And on from there, he engages with society. He engages with Babur when he's returning from his greatest journey to Mecca. Babur has not yet established the Mughal Empire. And Guru Nanak gets a first-hand view of the atrocities and the pain of warfare of his time, where he sees the carnage that Babur's men have perpetrated on the town of Sayyadpur, which is modern-day Ahmedabad in Pakistan. And there, this man of God who has spent his entire life discoursing with holy men of various stripes and is deeply philosophical, is defined by his devotion, all of a sudden lets out a mighty roar. And the roar essentially is, how dare you do this? This is not okay. And with that, he lays the foundation of a fundamental principle which has informed the lives of the gurus that followed him and
Right.
continues to inform the lives of the Sikhs to this day. And that is engaging with the political, engaging with what's happening around you. So
Right.
that's what really struck me in the lives of not just Guru Nanak, but all the gurus who followed him as well.
I'm fascinated by the Udasis, Mr. Singh, because I think it's really fascinating that this man traveled so extensively, and there are gurudwaras in the route that he covered. There are also an inscription in Baghdad, which is disputed, of course. We don't know the veracity of it completely. But, as somebody so close to the Sikh faith and still trying to look at the historicity of it, how much of this is fables? His meeting with Babur, for instance, how much of it is in stories? How much of it can be kind of, clearly corroborated?
The short answer is that it's very, very difficult to sort of separate history from fable when you're separated by a distance of several hundred years. But then, I'm no historian. I'll throw up my hands right away. But primary sources are always tremendously important. And I would say that the most significant primary source that talks about Guru Nanak's engagement with Babur is Gurbani itself. In the Guru Granth Sahib, there's a collection of hymns that are known as Babarwani. And these are Guru Nanak's words. It's very clear that he's addressing Babur. He is talking about things that happened. He says, Baap ki janjale kabulo dhaya. With this wedding party of sin, the groom has arrived from Kabul. Babur had arrived from Kabul in Sayyidpur when Guru Nanak encountered him. In another Shabad, where he bemoans the fate of, he uses a young bride who's been devastated, sort of as and her condition as a metaphor for what Babur had wrought. And there, the term Babarwani is used in his own writings. So I think that, my personal belief is that the stories are not apocryphal. Babarwani is something that animates the spirit of Sikhism in a very, very profound way and finds its ultimate manifestation in the sword of Guru Gobind Singh. But that's a more of a philosophical discussion. To
Okay,
answer your question,
let's
yes, it's
break
hard.
up. Right. Let's talk about the Udasis. And it's very interesting because this was a very formative period where Guru Nanak Ji is traveling across India. He goes to Mecca. We've covered the story of Lakhpat, the Gurudwara over there, which is the edge of India, literally. He's meeting a lot of people, amalgamating a lot of ideas. And there's a very interesting connection that you've drawn even in Sikkim, which I didn't know about. So I would like you to tell our viewers about the Sikkim connection. How far is the evidence of Guru Nanak Ji's actual travels with the Gurudwaras or the kind of edifices, that are still there?
Indeed, indeed. And I'll be very upfront, finding historical evidence of this nature and sort of advancing the cause of history was far from my focus in this book, but I'll try to answer your question to the best of my ability. So the Karmapa is the third highest Lama in the Tibetan Buddhism hierarchy. My father went to Sikkim as a young man. I think he went there in 1956, 55 or 56. He was very, very young at that time and spent his entire life there. My father was very, very close to the last Karmapa and would visit him very often at his seat in Rumtek. That's when I had first heard about Guru Nanak Sahib's visit to Sikkim. My father had been told by the Karmapa that Tibetans in the past have considered Guru Nanak Sahib to be an instantiation of Guru Rinpoche or Padmasambhava, and he talked about their texts, that the Karmapa had read in monasteries that alluded to that. And my father never actually saw the texts, and they were in Tibetan, so he never learned how to read and write Tibetan. That was kind of the first inkling that I had of this history. And then, subsequently, a lot of northern Sikkim has, for the longest time, been tightly controlled and is under the control of the Indian Army. And several kilometers north, in the extreme reaches of Sikkim, there's a lake called Guru Dongmar, where the army had actually constructed a small gurdwara. So the local myth was that that was a place which never had any water. So when Guru Nanak visited there, he struck the ground with his staff and a spring bubbled forth and that formed the lake. That's the legend. And based on that legend, this Gurdwara had been constructed there. So I was aware of this as a child growing up in Sikkim. And then as I was doing my research for the book, I stumbled upon the writings of Trungpa Tuluku, and another reincarnated Tibetan Lama, which are quoted in the book, that also talks about the reverence that Guru Nanak is held in, within the Tibetan Buddhist community. So that's sort of what my retelling of Guru Nanak's travels to Sikkim is largely based on.
That's quite fascinating, actually. Of course, the Gurudwara, most army camps have Gurudwaras because in the remotest places, also because there's a huge number of Sikhs in the Indian army. But that part, this is a historic Gurudwara, so it would be interesting. But I'm going to talk about the Western leg, the travel to Mecca, for instance, which is also fascinating because in the Gurbani, are there references to Mecca? How is it seen? How are his travels interpreted through the poetry and the texts?
Sure. So one of the oldest sources of on Guru Nanak is by Gurdas. So Bhai Gurdas was related to the fifth Guru, Guru Arjan, and he was essentially his scribe. He was the one who actually wrote down the first instance of the Guru Granth Sahib. So there are two Sikhs, or three actually, but let's talk about two Sikhs whose writings are accorded the status of Gurbani, sort of according to the modern practice of Sikhism. One of them is by Gurdas. The other one is by Nandalal, who was one of the court poets of Guru Gobind Singh. So it's important to understand that by Gurdas, his writings are not incorporated into the Guru Granth Sahib, but they are largely considered as, they are called the kunji, or the key that opens up the Guru Granth Sahib. So it's his interpretation which is fundamental. So in Bhai Gurdas's writings, we find references to Guru Nanak's Udasis, his travel to Baghdad, for instance. We find the instance of where, this lovely story that everyone has heard, where Guru Nanak, and it's recounted in the book as well, where Guru Nanak is sleeping, in essentially a sarai, and his foot is towards the Kaaba, and one of the custodians gets very offended that this foolish man is sleeping with his feet towards the Kaaba, and he roughly kicks his feet, and lo and behold, the Kaaba is now seen in a different direction. So it's an apocryphal story, the point of which of course is that the divine is everywhere. So these stories are recounted in some of the earliest writings in Sikhism, such as by Gurdas, and also the Janam Sakhis, which translates roughly to, quote, the birth chronicles, that I draw upon very, very heavily in my work.
Right. What has fascinated me about Sikhism, like many other people, is the earthiness of Sikhism and the brotherhood it propounds, be it the langar or the sangat, or whichever way you look at it. Now, what is also interesting is the ferment out of which the faith emerges. It was a time when there were Muslim and Hindu influences, and that is very well established even in the way Guru Nanak Ji's travels are talked about. You write about how he started his travels wearing a saffron jacket, Islamic cap, a shoe on one foot and a sandal on the other of American, and that's how he went out. There's a lot of Ram and Rahim in the Guru Granth Sahib, right? I mean, in the I would say, in the teachings of the Guru Granth Sahib. Uh, so how do you see this faith? Was it a coming together of ideas? Was it rooted in its times? Because at the same time, you do have a history of a little bit of conflict with the Mughal political authorities. Yet there is a clear difference between the brotherhood on the ground and a political battle. They don't kind of, uh, it's not poisoned by the political issue, is what I'm trying to say, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, so there is a tradition which has largely now been discounted by serious scholars. The Ram and Rahim coming together can, in a very banal manner, lead you to the conclusion that there was a ferment of ideas. There was Hinduism, there was Islam, those were the dominant religions. And Guru Nanak kind of took the two together, put them in sort of together and created.
I didn't mean it in that way. I just meant his respect for both sides. I mean, I didn't mean in the sense that it came from that, but rather the fact that he was so open-minded that he, believed in the goodness of all faiths.
It's important to make the point, though, that you may not have intended it in that manner, but a lot of people who were regarded serious scholars once did. And, to me, that's a very, very interesting notion and a very lazy notion, if you'll pardon me for being somewhat cheeky, because it really sort of scratches the surface of Guru Nanak's worldview. So his respect for the faiths was very, very real. He was, make no mistake, Sikhism did not occur by accident. Guru Nanak built the faith brick by brick. And this was the big difference between Guru Nanak and several other visionaries who preceded him, whose ideas were very similar to his, such as Bhagat Kabir, such as Bhagat Namdev, who all railed against caste discrimination. But Guru Nanak went a step further. He created institutions that were designed to drive a stake into the heart of caste discrimination. So that was the fundamental difference between Guru Nanak and a lot of thinkers who surrounded him. Now, Guru Nanak was not about proselytizing. He didn't go around telling people, become my follower, become a, quote, Nanak Panthi, which is what his followers were called at some point. He told Hindus to be good Hindus, and he told Muslims to be good Muslims. His fight was against superstition. His fight was against social evils. His fight was against political evil. He was not content to stand by while Babur massacred the citizens of Sayyidpur. He felt impelled to speak up. So all of these things inform the faith that Guru Nanak created. I mean, you made a reference to the Langar. I mean, the Langar is an institution that really shines a light on the brilliance and the genius of Guru Nanak. Caste discrimination. How was it implemented? Through separation. A Brahmin would not eat with a person from a lower caste. Well, the Langar took care of that because nobody would be admitted to Guru Nanak's presence or any Guru's presence until he or she ate in the Langar. What did that mean? You had no idea whether the person sitting next to you was a Brahmin, untouchable. You had essentially lost caste. You had put your money where your mouth was and said, I'm not just paying lip service to ending caste discrimination. I will sit in a pangat and eat with everyone else. And then this whole notion of social justice, this whole notion of doing something about exploitation, because the system of land ownership at that time exploited people mercilessly, and Guru Nanak railed against that. There was hunger, there was poverty. And so the other purpose of the Langar was to create an institution which would feed the hungry 3 times a day, 365 days a year with no questions being asked. So I go back to Guru Nanak's connection with the world around him and the society around him, and his very deliberate attempt to create, or a very deliberate act in creating a faith that was going to bring about a new way of life.
Interestingly, the Guru Granth Sahib was finally penned down in 1604. It was finally done in 1604, 100 years later. How did the book change the dynamics of the faith? And also tell us, what do you think are the turning points, the milestones in the story of the Sikhs in terms of the faith?
So those are big questions, both of them. I'll take them separately. Let's talk about the Guru Granth Sahib first. I believe that Guru Arjan, the fifth Guru, who essentially compiled the Guru Granth Sahib, created three great institutions in his lifetime, and I talk about that in the book. The first one was the Golden Temple, or the Sri Harmandir Sahib, which is very obvious, and it's there for all of us to see. And then there was the Guru Granth Sahib, and then the third was sort of instituting or completely integrating this notion of fighting tyranny, which had huge impact. It had a huge impact on the future history of the Sikhs. So focusing on the Guru Granth Sahib for a second, in a certain sense, the writing of the Guru Granth Sahib was completed by Guru Arjan, but it wasn't started by him. It was started by Guru Nanak himself. Why do I say that? Because he painstakingly recorded his utterances, his Bani. Those were compiled in a book and they were given to his successor. And thus the tradition continued. So Guru Angad's Bani was collected, Guru Amar Das's Bani was collected, Guru Ram Das's Bani was collected. And then Guru Arjan added his own and added the Bani of various other Bhagats and saints that agreed with the themes. But the important part is that the process had started in Guru Nanak's lifetime itself. Now, when the Guru Granth Sahib was given its present form by Guru Arjan, there are several sort of important practical things that we can't lose sight of. Remember, the battles for succession were continuing fast and furious. So after Guru Nanak, every subsequent guru signed Nanak as their name, which is also a very, very important thing, but we'll focus on that separately. The pretenders to the throne of the guru, most notably Prithi Chand, Guru Arjan's older brother, had started composing their own quote unquote Bani. Now today, with the benefit of historical distance, we are not confused about who the first guru was, who the second guru was, who the fifth guru was. Well, it wasn't the case then. There were competing gurus, and there was this guru who was saying, oh, I have divine wisdom as well. I'm writing my own Bani. So it was, from a practical point of view, very essential that the Sikhs have sort of an unimpeachable source of the writings of the gurus. And that's what Guru Arjan gave us. And, his brilliance was manifested in the manner in which he structured the Guru Granth Sahib. This is very nerdy now, but, the numbering schemes were intricate. The structure was intricate to the point that it was essentially tamper-proof. If anyone ever tried to insert something in there, they would have to mess with the entire structure, the numbering scheme. So it was brilliant. It had a profound impact on Sikhs and Sikhism because now there was this holy book that contained the wisdom of the previous gurus. The seal, so to speak, had been put on it. It was unimpeachable. It served as the source of the daily regimen of Sikh prayer. And then if we fast forward to the time of Guru Gobind Singh, it was elevated to the position of the Guru himself. And by the way, this is not something that happened exclusively in the time of Guru Gobind Singh. Even when the fifth Guru created the scripture, he essentially placed it at a height and bowed before it, sort of, symbolizing that he was bowing before the divine wisdom that was contained in there. So it had an exalted position then. And then in the time of Guru Gobind Singh, it was formalized. Spiritual authority was vested formally in the Guru Granth Sahib. And from that day, it became the eternal Guru of the Sikhs. So in that sense, it had a profound impact on the faith of Guru Nanak, the faith that Guru Nanak had created. And, we see it today. The Guru Granth Sahib is central to the practice of Sikhism.
I'm going to move to your current role as also somebody who's got a very popular podcast talking to youngsters across the world about Sikhism and about the faith. I'm going to ask you, how much of the interactions and the insights that you glean from these conversations with youngsters did you bring into this book? Because, at a time when, the distance between the youth and faith in many cases is widening. There is need to re-look at our historical figures, at our philosophers, and encapsulate and underline the relevance of their teachings in today's world. It's a difficult time to be in, like always. So how did that influence the way you approach this story?
So you've nailed the ethos of the book, really. Very elegantly. This is exactly what this book is. Now, to answer your question very directly and then broaden it a little, the podcast, in a certain sense, the interaction after I started my podcast was very one way. I mean, that's the nature of the medium. You're a broadcaster, you put it out and people listen. So I did get a lot of feedback, particularly from young people. And at the risk of sounding immodest, most of it was along the lines of, wow, we never thought that we could engage with our faith in this manner. And that was very deliberate. This is stuff that I learned not while doing the podcast, but in the 20 years that I spent in little classrooms teaching a group of young Sikh teenagers about their history. I'm a huge proponent of teaching our young children our languages. If somebody wants to study Hinduism, they should read, Sanskrit, learn it, and read the text in the original. No difference as far as Sikhism is concerned. It's hugely important that young Sikhs read Gurmukhi, read Gurbani in the original, learn Braj Bhasha, and engage with some of this fabulous historical literature that we have. But I'm also a pragmatist. I know that not every young person, particularly in the modern world, who lives in the diaspora or is educated in English in the Indian context, is going to do this. So what do we do? The answer is, while emphasizing the importance of engaging with the originals, we have to provide high quality materials, books, podcasts, films, whatever the medium might be, that bring this history to young people and that bring it to them in a very, very engaging manner, not in a pedantic manner, not in a way that's going to make them sort of yawn and run away and never want to engage again, but something that really, really engages their interest. And that's what the podcast tried to do. And I would say managed to do fairly successfully. And that is exactly what I'm endeavoring to do with this book in print as well.
We live in tough times, and the kernel of every faith, I feel, is the same, and the message is the same, and there is a need to perhaps underline the sameness and not the divisiveness. In that context, what is your message for people reading this book? Because I do think that everybody should read all books and understand the universal appeal of the ideas, which are, it's amazing that something that was written in the 16th century is as relevant today as it was ever. It's fascinating. So how, as a broadcaster, as an author, do you kind of work towards that?
So that's a profound question, and particularly in the times that we live in, where, as you observe, the world is fractured in so many different ways. I'm a practicing Sikh. I'm sure I look very traditional because I am, in a certain sense. I am deeply, deeply committed to my faith and derive, a lot of things from it. At the same time, my view of the world is not constrained by my faith, and this is a lesson that I learned from none other than Guru Nanak. His worldview was so broad so all-encompassing that nobody was a stranger, nobody was an enemy. And that's sort of the, if my message, quote unquote, is meaningful to anyone, that's what it would be. Don't fall into the traps that are laid out in front of us in the name of, sectarianism, this tribal view that I'm right and everybody else is wrong. I mean, I'm an Amritari Sikh, which means that I've been initiated. I follow the discipline of an Amritari. But I can tell you my pet peeve is those people who would judge others. Let's keep it within Sikhism for a second. One Sikh judging another saying, oh, he is not an Amritari. Another Sikh judging another saying, oh, he shaved off his beard and has taken his turban off. He is less of a Sikh. Nonsense. This sort of thinking has no place in the worldview of Guru Nanak. And then if we extend it, it applies to Hinduism, it applies to Islam, it applies to, the very odd sort of practice of Christianity that we see in the US, where it's, all the beautiful messages about universal brotherhood are lost, and xenophobia, in a certain sense, lives along with religion, which I find inexplicable. So that's what I really go back to. We should all have this ability to be fiercely proud of who we are and then stop before we get into somebody else's face. Because why do they not have a right to be equally proud of who they are? Absolutely. So this pluralism is something that we have to teach ourselves every day, because there are powerful forces out there who are against it.
Absolutely. Fiercely proud of what we are and deeply respectful about what the other person is representing.
Absolutely.
Right. More power to you in that endeavor. And I think that's really the message that I would like to be the lasting message from this conversation. So I'll end it here. Many, many thanks for joining us today and taking us through the story of the Sikhs. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was absolutely my pleasure. I'm very aware of your platform and I know of the wonderful work that you do. So I'm delighted to be on this.
Thank you so much.